Hello, everyone. I'm Caron Paxio, Immediate Past President of the Sacramento Valley CPC Society Chapter. As Alexis mentioned earlier today, we are beginning the first of the two of our breakout sessions. If you would like to join me, I will be in breakout session A, and we will be having a conversation addressing employee retention and the virtual workforce. My hosts will be Darren Bloomfield and Jeff Gibson. Dr. Russell, did you want to introduce your session?
Sure, Caron. I will be hosting Scott Carpinteri, who is president of K2 Parametric, a provider of parametric insurance, a product about which many people are unaware. And it's a unique experience for the insured and maybe a new product for you. Whether you go into presentation A or presentation B, I'm sure you'll be delighted.
So at the bottom of your screen, you should find a button that says breakout room, and you can select which breakout room you would like to participate.
Great. Thank you for that introduction. And thanks for joining me in the parametric side of the choose your red pill or blue pill. I actually probably should have gone to the other session myself, because after 20 years at Swiss Re, I quit my job last year. So maybe I should try to learn a thing or two about retaining employees from the other session. So yeah, thank you again for joining. I actually have some screens to share. And I encourage folks to comment in the chat room if you have questions, or we're also going to save some time later on in the presentation here to answer any questions that folks may have. So if this is working properly, I did do a test before. Hopefully you should see a screen right now.
Indeed, we do.
Holy smokes, it worked. All right. Yeah, I'm good at parametric, but I tell you, sometimes these presentation software, I'm not sure. So great. So we'll thank you for that, that presentation. Welcome to all the folks joining the session from various regions or various parts of sort of the Western regions of CPCU. To anyone that's up early in Hawaii, aloha. And so we just want to give you a little bit of a background here. I'm curious that normally if I did this in person, I'd have people raise their hands if they know about parametric or have seen parametric. So what I'm going to assume on this presentation is that there's a combination of experience levels in the room, maybe folks that are maybe seeing something more formal for the first time, and then maybe folks that have maybe gone as far as to, you know, place a deal or work on a deal or two. And now also being mindful of the audience, it is the CPCU. We'll take a little bit more of an underwriting bend to this. There are lots of angles you could hit. I'll touch briefly upon several angles, but we'll hit the underwriting side a little bit harder for this audience. And again, we'll save questions for the end. So if you want to just pile questions into the chat, I'll have Dr. Russell just monitor that, and maybe he can hit me with some questions in the end. Although if Dr. Russell, if you see something that's just super pressing, particularly if I misspeak, please feel free to jump in. I'm not used to my presentations being recorded, so I'll try to keep them a little less fresh than normal.
We're all friends here. We're all friends with Scott. And
yeah.
I think the chat is a great way to sort of log the questions. But if we have time, we will also take questions from people who raise their hand in real time.
Sweet. All right, thank you for that. All right, so here we go. And so start off, what is a parametric insurance policy? And so I'll tell you, my space is getting a little bit more recognized than it once was. And I'm sure there are some people on this panel or this call right now that have heard it or have been reading articles in industry press about it. Then probably a bunch of folks that it's still relatively new, but I thought I'd start with just a very, very basic explanation here. So parametric insurance policy is basically an insurance policy where the payout is based on pre-agreed parameters. That's where the parametric word comes from, of a pre-agreed event. And so we'll get into examples in a little bit of what those events might look like and how that might sort of shape up. But that's all basically it is. So any barometric policy has basically a few components. The first of which is if an event happens that has parameters of X, many of the events we talk about have to do with proximity or physical type sort of events and physical locations. So it will be in location Y. It pays an amount Z. And that's pretty much it. So I'll close up for the day. I hope everyone had a great day. No, I'm teasing. So that's the basics of how that is. And so that just kind of sets the very basic sort of foundation of what we're talking about here. So far, hopefully not flipping everyone out, although it is very different. So for the more seasoned underwriters on the panel here, it's already going to take everything you know and kind of turn it about 90 degrees or so. But that is fundamentally just the very, very basics of what Parametric's all about. And so big question is, well, this is kind of cool from an intellectual standpoint. As I'm both an actuary and an underwriter, forgive me for the first one, and by training, and from an insurance nerd standpoint, which I have a lot of in me, I mean, building these policies, writing these policies, structuring these policies, pricing these policies, all very, very cool stuff. But I think we all have seen things that people maybe sit in the basement or an ivory tower and design something and they say, oh, the people are going to love this. And then they roll it out and nobody loves it. The big question here on Parametric is, why are people choosing this? So yes, we could go into an hour or two of a discussion about how it works from the carrier perspective and why from the insurance side of the equation it's really cool. But why is it interesting and appealing to the buyers? And I just use the word cool, but cool is actually not why anyone buys Parametric. Cool is why people buy, cars, but not their insurance policies. So I'm going to hit one right off the top. It's not about gambling. So that is a very common comment or question that I'll receive from people who maybe are first learning about parametric insurance, or perhaps have kind of had the concept battered around a little bit, but they maybe don't firmly grasp it. So when you think about, hey, I basically just can get paid if a particular earthquake happens in a particular spot or a particular hurricane happens in a particular spot, isn't like putting a bunch of chips on red on the table. This is a very, very common question from rather astute people as well. Here's the difference in that. When you have a business or a municipality or a public entity it's exposed to natural catastrophe risk or other perils that we might talk about today, you're in the game. You're at the table. The idea of, oh, I'm putting my chips on black, that comes from a place, gambling is speculation where you really don't have any stake until you enter the game. In this world, if you open a hotel in Miami Beach or Laguna Beach, like it or not, you have to deal with hurricane or earthquake risk. And the gamble is doing nothing about it. That's where you're saying, I'll just let the wheel spin and it probably won't land on 00 because most of the time it doesn't. That is the gamble. What this product is a hedge that says, okay, if the ball does land on 00, to keep it with this analogy, I actually get less pain because I bought this product that is counter to the risk I already face by being seated at the table, running my operation in an nat-cat zone. So hopefully that, to a group like the CPCU folks, kind of makes a little bit of sense. It's a very, very fair and common question that people have, but my response is that, exposing your business to an earthquake or a hurricane, or I mentioned the folks in Hawaii who actually, there's an island that actually has both hurricane and earthquake risk. That is actually the gamble, is when you face that risk and you do nothing about it. So it's not a gamble. So what is it? It's actually a risk management tool. So we'll get into some examples in a bit here of how this tool is very powerful. But basically, when you think about risk managers or treasurers or CFOs or whoever makes insurance decisions and purchases within an organization, they have several tools at their disposal. They can buy classic indemnity insurance. And I saw on the list, there's at least one or two property underwriters that I've seen, I saw on the attendee list here. So, property insurance or casualty insurance or any kind of typical indemnity risk transfer insurance policy is available. There are other ways of dealing with risk. Many folks just figure they're going to take out loans after an event happens. So they're going to do post-loss funding. Other folks see the government being a helpful addition to post-loss funding. And so whether that's the state or the federal agencies or FEMA, they see that as a risk mitigant. And others will maybe put some money away in a sinking fund and to say, we're going to build up a little war chest for the inevitable day when things go wrong. All of those are valid tools to deal with one's risk of running an organization. In my personal view, a proper risk management tool involves several, if not all of those solutions. So there's kind of an old school way of thinking that says, oh, FEMA assists, so I don't need to buy insurance. I don't need to build a sinking fund. I don't need to worry about post-loss financing because they'll just come and ride up in their white knight and cut me a big check and we all go on our merry way. Organizations who have dealt with risk that way have learned a very strong lesson with what FEMA does and doesn't do. The Parametric is just another tool that behaves differently than the other tools. And each of these tools has a pro and con associated, or pros and cons associated with them. But the pros and cons are different from one tool to the next to the next. So a combination of the tools actually creates a very nice sort of more robust risk management and risk transfer mechanism. And so that gets to the final bullet here is this parametric insurance product that says we're going to pay if bad things happen in certain places. And what it does is it allows to open the door to coverage to types of costs that are not classically insurable or insured. So it kind of fits in to complete the puzzle a little better of creating a little bit more choice and a bit possibility of transferring risk to an insurance company that didn't realistically exist before. So my final little bullet there in the blue box, parametric insurance can pay for costs associated with the trigger event, which are difficult, if not impossible, to underwrite and cover on an attritional indemnity basis. And again, we'll get into more examples of that in just a bit here. But this is a little bit of okay, so what is it and why are people doing this? Now, a little bit more into the nuts and bolts, just again for this audience, is what makes for a good parametric trigger. So we say, okay, we're going to have an insurance policy that says if these particular things happen and maybe in these locations or at this time period or a combination of locations and time periods, the insured is entitled to a certain amount of money. Okay, good. We'll get into more examples, but at the moment, people are taking my word for it. Okay, people are buying this. It's kind of cool. All right. But what makes a good parametric trigger? What can you trigger off of? So my sort of high level view of this, and I spent a lot of time working on this over the past 6+ years, is trying to figure out, okay, what fits this profile well? So my little cheat sheet is, one, is it a fortuitous event? So that's a relatively easy one. That's sort of insurance 101, although you'd be surprised with the questions I have entertained in my professional career. So you can't say, hey, can you sell me an insurance policy in case I do this to my head? Well, yeah, no, because I can just do that to my head. So, fortuitous must be fortuitous in nature, ideally not in the control of the insured. There's a lot of gray area in that as well. Number two, objectively and reliably measured. So we all have to agree that this particular thing happened, ideally from a third party. Again, can't be the insured saying, oh my gosh, you should have seen what happened. Trust me, wink, wink. And you can't have the carrier who's in charge of writing the check to pay for this say, yeah, I don't know, I believe you. So something very objective and measurable, so that there's basically no fighting. The parametric world, one of the benefits of parametric triggers are that you move on with your life. the thing happens, you look at the data, you pay, and there's not a prolonged claims adjudication process, which happens in many of the other lines of business. Requirement 3, is it correlated to economic pain for the insured? So again, getting away from that gambling thing versus a hedge. You can't put a parametric trigger on your ex-spouse's house and say, yeah, I'm hoping for something bad to happen. That's not really what this is all about. This is about, hey, I'm putting a parametric trigger on a place where I have a financial interest. If that thing goes down, I have got big problems. Might be my own asset, might be a public asset. But is that correlated to financial pain? This thing that happens, is it related to financial pain? Because basically we're solving it with money. So that's makes for a nice parametric solution if it's something that you can solve with money. Now it gets to more sort of TPCU type stuff. Is it able to be modeled? So there are some perils out there where, yes, theoretically, this does fit criteria 1, 2, and 3, but in the end, the carrier has to come up with some sort of probability that they think that the thing will happen. Now, depending on how correlated this risk is to other losses within a portfolio, you may have to take that exercise a lot more seriously, or if it's something that is very uncorrelated to your portfolio for the sake of sort of building a new product line and building knowledge, you might take what we might call a little bit more of a flyer on that. So number 4, there's some sort of shades of number 4. And number 5, probably the most important one of all, because 1 through 4 don't matter a ditty until you have someone who's willing to take the risk. And we'll get into a few more examples on this. So yeah, is there insurance company or capital markets or some party willing to take that risk that fits the first 4 criteria here? So with that, we're going to go through some more examples, because I like examples. I feel like that solidifies points. There we go. So we'll go through these one by one. So we'll start with what we call in the parametric space weather triggers or temperature. So example of where these spaces are used very well are in construction. So you maybe have a multi-year project and they're planning on, they'll lose a certain number of work days because of inclement weather. But if the frequency of inclement weather over the span of the life of the construction project, maybe 2 years, exceeds the normal, like by far the normal frequency of lost days. Now, it might be because of hot temperatures and the crews can't work. It might be because of sub-zero temperatures and the crews can't work. It might be because of rainfall, etc. This is specific to the location and the region of where this is taking place. But this is the type of request that one might get, is saying, okay, we're building a stadium in Southern California. It doesn't rain very much, but when it does, it really rains. So we're going to plan on a total of a week or 2 worth of lost days over the course of the 4 or 5 year project. If things get much worse than that, we're going to have problems and run going off schedule. You do not deliver a professional sports stadium late, the penalties are nuclear. So it's going to cost us money to get this thing back on track. So building a parametric trigger that says, okay, if we have more than 30 days of rain or 40 days of rain or 60 days of rain, something much outside of the norm that could happen, then we're entitled to a recovery that helps us throw money at the project, get it back on track. So a little bit of a setup there. So temperature, too hot, too cold, too wet, too dry. Lots and lots of industries that use triggers like this. So is it fortuitous? Yeah, last I checked, people can't control the weather. Last I checked, people can't even predict the weather very well. So fortuitous, absolutely. Is it objectively measured? Absolutely. Weather stations and basically every airport in the US has rain, temperature, very, very robust data going back sometimes pretty far. Correlated economic pain. Well, if it's related to one of these industries that needs to deliver a project on time, or if you're dealing with agricultural clients where too little or too much rain, each of which can be a problem. I was up in Napa recently and they just had their harvest season. When the heat comes too quickly, as it did last month, you have to accelerate the harvest season, and is a much, much more challenging endeavor to get those grapes off the vines before the grapes sort of pass their prime. Is it modelable? Generally speaking, temperature, if you got enough back data, yes, it is. Although as an actuary, I'd say don't just look at the back data. There's a lot of bad stuff that can happen that didn't happen in the last 10 or 20 years. But generally speaking, yes, weather's pretty modelable. And is the risk appetite? Yeah, generally speaking, there is. It's not that bad a peril for folks who want to cover. So next one, Nat Cat. So this is what we happen to do at K2 Parametric today. Hurricane and earthquake. So kind of very quickly, fortuitous. Yep, people can't control that. Although I guess there's the nuclear James Bond version of an earthquake, and then the fracking, which is its own sort of side conversation, but for the most part, fortuitous. Objectively measured, absolutely. Hurricanes and earthquakes are very, very well tracked with lots and lots of data. Economic pain, more economic pain than people want to admit that they would face in the wake of one of these disasters. And unfortunately, this one people don't probably pay enough attention to, because each of these perils are far, far underinsured. And we're going to see data on this regarding Ian, even though hurricane is actually a requirement for mortgagees and many lenders. There's still a lot of gap in those coverages, and the data is not going to be pleasant of the amount of economic damage with Ian and the amount of insured recovery. Nat Cat, is it modelable? Absolutely. We have 30 or so years worth of modeling expertise in the industry, always developing. Are the models wrong? Yep, but it's a nice measuring stick to help you compare one risk against another, one portfolio against another. So are they absolutely are they perfect? Nope, but they are useful and gets the industry to harmonize around sort of a single point of truth, or at least a few opinions of a point of truth. Risk appetite. Absolutely, there's Nat Cat risk. Now, maybe less right now than there was last year, and less than there was than the year before that. But yeah, there's generally risk appetite for Nat Cat. So there's are two that kind of pass all the green lights. Wildfire. This one, sitting in California, I get this one asked of me a lot. Wildfire fortuitous. For the most part, yes, unless you're looking to insure the utility, who is often responsible, or at least accused of being responsible for the starting of the wildfire. So wildfire is a funky one because it's a combination of man-made and natural trigger. So this one gets into some interesting areas. But for the most part, we give that one a check. I put a little question mark on there, but most part, yeah, it's fortuitous. Objectively measured. Yes and no. So wildfire is actually a high resolution peril. So that what I mean to say is, for folks who've seen those wildfire maps that had those little kind of red splotchy bits on the map that showed where the wildfire was, there's a lot of misconception about that. That splotch does not mean that everything within that red area was completely destroyed or burned. What that is the fire perimeter, and our firefighters do as good a job as they can trying to map out where the perimeters of those fires are to inform the public as to what's going on, to help evacuation decisions and etc. That doesn't mean everything within that red splotch was destroyed. So in order to really do a wildfire trigger on a parametric basis, you need much higher resolution than just that splotchy map, and will probably involve satellite technology. Now, the satellites are getting good. That was very cool. I did not do that, but yeah, there's a little stripe on the screen now. The satellite technology is getting very, very good, but we need it to be very, very robust to actually get the objective measure that you need to determine if a particular spot on the earth was burned by wildfire or not. Is there economic pain associated with wildfire? Darn right. By the way, my homeowner's rate doubled over the last 2 years. So I'm 4 blocks from the mountains. I'm not even in the mountains. Is it modelable? Yes and no. So this one's controversial. I'm sure if we open up the mics, people would have lots of opinions on this one. it should be modelable, but the history probably doesn't tell you too much about the future because the frequency of wildfire seems to be going up for lots and lots of reasons. And then finally, is there a risk appetite for wildfire? I'd say I'm not sure. And so this is when I look at wildfire parametric and I'm deciding what our next projects will be in my company and building out our next product lines, this last one is a huge problem. And the reason why people are asking for wildfire parametric is not because of the benefits of parametric in that sort of it fits that puzzle piece nicely, like I said in the prior slides. People are asking about wildfire parametric because they're upset that their rates have doubled and that they're struggling to get coverage. Well, the problem with creating a parametric wildfire is, guess who has to take that risk that we structure? Well, the insurance companies that basically are topped up on wildfire risk and don't want any more of it. So the same problem that brings people seeking parametric for a wildfire for an alternative solution, they're not looking for parametric wildfire because of the benefits of parametric that can really assist with particular nuances of that peril. They're looking for it because they can't find coverage. And unfortunately, the risk takers in parametric world are the insurance companies as a whole. And so they're faced with a problem if you wish to write property insurance, the first peril in every property form is fire. And fire is fire is fire. I've not seen anyone successfully carve out wildfire to a separate cat peril that you can treat differently. So if you write property, guess what? You have nat cat in your portfolio through wildfire, which is exposed in more and more states every year, it seems.
Scott, if I can hop in here for a second, your last row, risk appetite, and you've mentioned insurers, they're already on the hook for fire. And so when you find capacity or a reinsurer, an insurer, whatever you want to call the risk taker, but K2 Parametric finds a buyer and matches buyer and risk taker for the students in the group. So that's what an MGA does. But in terms of the capacity, is the problem with the risk appetite for any of the perils that you've described there, is there no rate that's high enough to attract a wildfire or pandemic risk? If I raise the rate online or the premiums high enough, will capital emerge to back pandemic risk or wildfire risk?
Yeah, great question. And for those who joined the prior session, the progressive guy has basically had a view of there's no bad risk, there's just bad prices. The actuary in me was just so delighted to hear that and have a lot of respect for progressive. The issue is it's a combination of things. So progressive doesn't have to face, for the most part, this type of exposure. There's not really going to be a day where everyone in the country or in a state or even a city gets into an automobile accident on the same day. This stuff is different. The correlation that exists here and the accumulation that exists here is very different than in progressive world. So in sort of in insurance other than automobile, there's a lot of accumulation that you have to worry about. And so the amount of capital that the industry needs to backstop, oh crap, there could be a day where an entire town disappears. That's real. And that is capital changing. And I think where this is such a challenge today is wildfire is considered one of those all other perils. It's like, no, the industry is built to handle earthquake in Tokyo, earthquake in San Francisco, hurricane in Miami, terror in New York, right? Those are the mega events that are capital changing, that you need to spread that risk all around the world across many different types of stakeholders. Wildfire is probably closer to one of those risks than, some of the other perils that the industry has kind of dealt with the accumulation, but not in such a robust way that they have for the other perils mentioned. It's really all about how many policies can you whack in a particular event, and this is why property is so reinsurance heavy is very complex. It's not the individual, underwriting an individual building should not be difficult, but the idea that there are perils that can wipe out an entire book of a portfolio, that is a big deal. And cyber is the scariest of them all because it theoretically knows no geographic boundary. So the industry used to worry about Tokyo earthquake, terror New York, Miami hurricane, and cyber makes that seem like a joke. And so cyber, I've got question marks on all the cybers because you don't even know that the thing happened. It's not as fortuitous because there are a lot of levels of protection one can do to their own infrastructure. Cyber is just full of question marks for me. There are folks doing it. There's actually a parametric cyber product. It does it in a very, very interesting way. It focuses on a very specific niche, on something that's very objective and actually meets those criteria, but it's not super broad like most people think cyber to be. Pandemic, I think pandemic hits all the ticks except for the last one. And pandemic is like cyber. I spent the first 2 months of COVID fielding calls just about every day from people looking for pandemic insurance, typically on a parametric basis. Munich Re has a pandemic product. They've had a pandemic product for several years before COVID. They didn't sell any of them because people, unfortunately, are more reactive than proactive. So nobody wanted to spend any money on a pandemic product, even though we've had some warning shots just over the past 20 years alone. Nope, don't want to spend the money. And then all of a sudden COVID hit and everybody wanted it. Everybody wanted it for the live event, which just blew my mind. And you can't insure burning barns, or you shouldn't at least. I put an X on the risk appetite for pandemic, even the Munich product. I don't think that they have an appetite for a meaningful number of the world's exposed entities to have this product. They have an appetite to take a handful of this risk. This is the most correlated peril, and perhaps cyber, when everyone on the planet would have filed a claim in the same year. I don't think that's a mechanism that fits for insurance. Insurance is about smoothing risk. When Elon Musk gets his way and we have civilizations on other planets, maybe we can actually spread this risk as an insurance and as an interplanetary insurance industry. But at the moment we're on one planet, this one, I don't think this one, and people disagree. I think Evan Greenberg actually has a little bit different view on that, and I respect him. I think that one's just too tricky. And then product efficacy, I've literally been asked, hey, I have this company that has this really state-of-the-art thing. It's very experimental. We don't know if it's going to work or not. Can you insure us in case it doesn't work? My personal view of that is that's what investors are for. Investors are for product risk, not the insurance industry. I'm personally not interested in taking risk from somebody who knows exponentially more about whether or not that thing can happen than I do.
Scott, do you want to talk about specific examples of triggers in contracts that you may have placed or being under consideration?
Yep. Yeah. So I'm going to lean on the NatCat because that's where my world is. So we'll start with earthquake because that's probably more near and dear to the folks on this call. So we talk about earthquake parametric. So the first thought is people are thinking, oh, so you're going to sell an earthquake parametric policy and the insured is going to use it to help fix their buildings. Yeah, you can do that, but that's actually not where the earthquake parametric excels, right? There's a very well-defined property insurance policy form with a coverage called physical damage that, quite frankly, if any of the buildings that we are sitting in today are gone tomorrow, that is not the world's most difficult claim to adjudicate. You're going to get similar kind and quality, similar square footage, not the end of the world. And I hope the underwriters would agree with me, not the world's hardest thing to underwrite typical buildings that we're all sitting in today, provided that you have good data. There are more complex. So if anybody's sitting in a petrochemical plant right now, you're going to have a different story. But for the most part, typical sort of this building I'm sitting in, it's pretty easy, just a bunch of sticks. When it comes to other things that those organizations will face in the wake of an earthquake, it's not just your buildings. And this is where I think in the industry, we focus so much on, and particularly in the property form, we focus so much on buildings. But there's another coverage form called business interruption. And there are other coverages called extra expense. In my personal view, these are a nightmare. We have a hyper precise property insurance policy that covers literally concrete things and bricks and beams and glass, but it also covers very, very vague things like what would my revenue have been but for this earthquake? What kind of expenses am I going to incur that I'm incurring because of this earthquake? That process from both an underwriting and a claim standpoint is, in my view, awful. And this is where the parametric can do a very nice job, because what the typical form says is we're going to have broad coverage, but we're going to get very specific and detailed on how we pay and what's in and what's out. The parametric world flips that. And what we say is we have a very narrow specific coverage or trigger that says, okay, if this particular amount of shaking happens at this location or these locations that the clients choose, we're going to pay you this amount of money. Now, there's no way for us to know specifically how much money a client will need just because their tech campus shook at 100% of gravity. But what we do know is something's going to go wrong and something's going to cost them more money. And a lot of that is not coverable, whether it's because their property form has a big deductible, whether it's because their property form has exclusions and sublimits for things like debris removal and landscaping and cracked sidewalks and all this fun stuff. And in addition, you only get that business interruption and extra expense in the classic property form behind the physical damage trigger. So if your campus does well, but the infrastructure around your campus is destroyed and your employees can't get to work, and there's no electricity, and we don't know how the data grid is going to survive in one of these disasters, these companies will have to be jumping through hoops of fire to keep their operations going. That's all going to cost money. The parametric is great for things like that. So I literally have a client that I had sold a parametric Nat Cat to, major technology company, and they built their buildings to the highest engineering standards. They did everything that they could control to the highest standards. They bought proper insurance. They bought massive amounts of proper insurance to cover well-built buildings. But what they don't control are the infrastructure, the roads, the bridges, the electricity grid, their employees' homes, the fact that their employees largely don't buy earthquake insurance. All of this is a problem to this company. All of these things will become a problem to this company. And so this is where the parametric excels. We've designed a structure where we literally put pins in towns where they had high concentrations of employees, because if those towns shook, or if the immediate area near one of the campuses shook, they were going to be throwing money at these problems to solve these problems. And having a flexible tool like a parametric payout that said, here's the bag of cash, do what you want with it, as long as it's related to the earthquake, they get to move on with their lives.
And Scott, just to motivate understanding further from that bag of cash. So the client that you referenced just now about they did all the right things, they overbuilt, they over-engineered, but they're still exposed. What would the contract look like? We'll get X if the shaking is Y.
Yep, exactly. So what we did on that one, it's a bit of it's a table. So one of the dimensions of the table is payout for shaking. So this particular client, we played around, we showed them some examples, we showed them some historic earthquakes in their area, and they said, we are not interested in money for ticky-tack shaking. If there's some minor-ish earthquake, we'll deal with that, thank you very much. We want money for the mega stuff. So we said, great. So first of all, we said, for each of the places where we put a trigger, and a trigger is a physical latitude, longitude point on the contract. For each of those places, we'll assign a limit to each of those places. And for each of those places, the payout will start at, I think we started at 80% of gravity or something like that. So we said, all right, you get 20% of your limit if it's at 80% of gravity. 80% of gravity are G forces. So people think earthquake and they think magnitude. That's not a good way to do a parametric insurance policy, because the magnitude refers to the energy released at the epicenter. The epicenter is over there, somewhere else. What you're concerned about is over here, and where the energy goes, every earthquake's unique. And so what we do is we pay based on where the energy goes and what the shaking was doing sort of at your location or at the locations that you care about. So we started paying at 80% of gravity, maybe 20% of the limit. At 90% or have gravity, they got 40% of the limit, et cetera, et cetera.
And where does that measure of gravity or the dimensions of the shaking, who compiles that? You mentioned a third party. Is this the U.S. Geological Survey? Is it some other party, and they have tables that, you know, are more complicated than, say, just a Richter scale?
Absolutely. Yep. And you nailed it. It's the USGS, and probably the world's authority. The USGS and the Japanese folks, probably the most expert collection of seismologists and scientists on the planet. Following every earthquake, they produce what's called a shake map, where they literally will publish a grid of thousands of latitude, longitude points in the affected area, and their calculation, their determination of what the shaking was. So single source of truth coming from independent bodies that are very well respected in this, that have no stake in this. Their stake is putting truth out there, and we in the insurance world use that to adjudicate our claims. If you think about the USGS, the reason why they create the first reason why they create the shake maps are to help the first responders know where to go. Where the shaking was worse, they're going to have more people in need of assistance. That's why they do it. They do it to try to save lives. So heck, if they're doing it to try to save lives, we can certainly put, you know, our silly money stuff around it.
And so we've gotten a number of questions in the chat, and they're wide ranging. So back to the beginning, Parametric sort of fills in the gaps of other coverage. So someone may buy earthquake insurance, but it doesn't cover everything. And there was also reference to what the perils are. So let me get this straight, because I happen to know that you've also placed some business with wind or hurricane risk in Florida or in the Gulf. So how would that trigger work? Would it go on wind speed? Would it go on rainfall? Tell us a little bit about how that would work.
Yep, for hurricane, the triggers that are most prevalent right now are based on wind speed. So same concept. In fact, the policy looks a heck of a lot like the earthquake policy, because you literally put latitude, longitude point on the map, and we have third-party data provider that says what is the maximum 1 minute sustained wind speed throughout the life of the event. And that particular product is called comes from, there are a couple of entities that do this. The one I use is called H-Wind. H-Wind is part of RMS, so we know RMS as one of the major CAT modeling companies. RMS actually purchased the H-Wind product from, purchased H-Wind when it was an independent entity, but H-Wind was developed within NOAA. And so the NOAA scientists got together and they said, we need to actually inform people of what happened where. We think this is going to be useful to the universe. And so they developed this way of collating all the data they can get their hands on, and then extrapolating and interpolating to have local latitude, longitude points of what the 1 minute sustained wind speeds were. And they felt that this tool would be most useful if they spun it out into the private sector. So they actually sold the operation that ultimately landed at RMS. So local sort of 1 minute sustained wind speeds. So examples in Florida might be, so yes, I own I have a hotel in Miami Beach. I put a pin on my hotel. Now, I kind of have the physical damage already through my traditional property insurance. I'm not going to buy this instead of the property insurance, but I've got a big deductible. I've got a lot of lush landscaping that pretty much don't get coverage on. I've got a lot of issues where maybe I can keep the hotel open after the event, but the power's out for a month. So I'm running generators 24/7. I might need to hire extra security after an event because maybe there's some civil disruption. I may struggle to get heads in the beds for a time after the hurricane because the beach has been wiped out. I don't own the beach. There's nothing I can do about that. The airport might get wiped out. I don't own the airport. Not much I can do about that. So a hotel owner might put a pin sort of at their hotel. They might put a pin at the beach if the hotel's not quite on the beach. They might put a pin at the airport because they know that 80% of the traffic at the hotel comes from out-of-state guests. And if the airport's out, they're going to struggle to fill all those beds in that community. Those are ways you can structure a parametric policy that is not meant to really replace the traditional indemnity. It actually complements and supplements it quite nicely.
A couple of the questions center around capacity, and you mentioned investors. We only have a minute or so. Could some of this risk and capacity come from cat bonds or some other investment that's triggered or not by the perils that and parameters you've identified?
Absolutely, yeah, and that's why I like the parametric NatCat, because it's enough of a challenge to get people to understand that this trigger exists. Though my joke is parametric is about three things: education, education, and education. And so using these perils is helpful, one, because they create widespread damage that has knock-on effects on your operation other than your own assets. Two, there's a well-established industry to absorb these risks. So that's insurance, reinsurance, and of course the capital markets. So we can just flow this in. So for instance, I have one sort of capacity provider right now where I have the authority to write business, and I have two more on the way. The first one, they folded some of this risk into their already purchased property insurance treaty. Their property reinsurers understood the concept of parametric. They were okay having some of this risk in there. Beautiful, worked out nice for my carrier and worked out nice for me. I have a second carrier that is looking to, they're actually going to buy special standalone reinsurance for the parametric. And then a third carrier that's actually going to take it net because they feel like they can understand it. And as long as we spread the risk enough, they're going to be okay with it. So kind of varied answers there.
Well, Scott, thanks so much for explaining a fairly complicated topic and making it seem simple. This is a product I think is kind of represents the future.